Hello and welcome to Maui. Today on this Adorama sponsored video, we're going to be talking about the 35mm f1.4 GM for Sony, which is one of my favorite lenses of all time. We're here at Not a Conference in Maui this week. What Not a Conference is? It is a portfolio building workshop series that we have brought, well, so far, to America and also to Canada. And I think we're all having a lot of fun. So this 35mm lens was the first lens that I picked up for the Sony Alpha system. It is typically, I would say, the first lens that I pick up for any system, whether it is a Nikon Z series, the Canon R series, and all of these cameras you can buy on Adorama. So the reason that I love this lens in particular, it is just a jack of all trades for any sort of content that you want to be creating. Whether you're going to be doing wedding photography like we've been doing here in Maui, or it is just vacation photos, I find this lens to be incredibly versatile. This is a photograph I call man standing in the square, wearing straw hat, photographer attempting to not be hit by horses. I was almost unsuccessful. I was nearly at least nibbled by a horse, but I did get the photo. So I got that going for me, which is nice. I love the fact that I can use it in incredibly low light conditions, and I also love the depth of field that I can achieve with this. Yes, I am one of those people that will shoot everything at 1.4 unless given a reason not to. And typically that reason for me is maybe 3 or 4 people kind of in the background that I would also like to have in focus. But if there is just 1 or 2 people in the image that I'm taking, I will be usually shooting it at f1.4, and I love the look from this lens. To keep this kind of in the scope of wedding day, when I arrive at a wedding getting ready location, I will typically be on my 35mm lens. I could use something like the Tamron 35 to 150 f2 to f2.8, which is also great, but it's a little bit large. It's heavy for me as the photographer, and it's also, it's a little bit scary. You walk into a room, all of my couples are similar to me. They're introverted. They're a little uncomfortable with the idea that there's going to be this photographer in the room with them taking images. And if you walk in with a smaller piece of kit, like this, they're going to be just a little bit more comfortable with you. I also like, specifically for weddings, that a lot of the time those getting ready environments, when you walk in, there's just stuff everywhere, stuff on the floor. If you shoot everything at 1.4, you can make a lot of that mess disappear into a nice artistic out of focus area. Moving from the getting ready section of the day, the 35mm lens will usually be the lens that is always on my second camera body. So while I might be using something like an 85 or a 50mm lens, this is going to be on my camera pretty much all day. When it comes to weddings, I also find that I don't really need anything wider than a 35. That might sound a little crazy. If you love wide angle photos, by all means, bring something a little bit wider, maybe the Sony 20mm f1.8 that you can get on Adorama. And yes, that is important to have in your bag, at least a wide angle lens of some sort. If you know you're not going to be using it a lot, maybe check out the Tamron 20mm f2.8 because it is an incredibly inexpensive lens. It's really a steal of a lens. It's for the Adorama series. I'll put the link up here. We did a budget Sony lens video, and that is one of the best budget Sony lenses. So yes, it is important to have that wide angle backup. It is something that I very rarely use. I will maybe use that lens for a cake cut, but I could use this 35mm lens. If you ever get in a jam and all you got is a 35 or a 50 and all of a sudden you're presented with a group shot of 55 people that you have to do, you can always build and stitch a panorama. Lightroom is very, very good at it. So what that means, everybody gets too wide for your lens, I will turn my camera sideways, vertical mode, and I'll just take photos of everybody across. I've done this a few times for large group shots, and I've even done it, I think this was on a 28mm lens. I've even done it for one of my favorite photos of all time. This is, I think, a 35 image stitch because it was just such a wide angle shot and I didn't have a super wide angle lens, but I was able to get it done by stitching a panorama. So for me, a 35 is that sweet spot for a wide angle lens on the wedding day, that it's not super wide, but it's not something that I ever really need. I also find for wedding photography specifically, that if you go really, really wide, you start distorting people and they start to look a little bit weird and not themselves. Whereas 35, you can kind of put people anywhere in the frame and they look very natural, and there's not just giant shoulders kind of poking out or big hands like right here. This is my hand. You don't get that when you're shooting with the 35. This is the Sony 20mm f1.8. Outside of weddings, it might be a little bit strange, but This is my go-to travel lens. It's not a zoom lens. I like the fact that it's a bit of a smaller lens, but it does everything that I need, and it creates something really aesthetically pleasing. So whether we're doing some video content or we're just simply out taking pictures, this is usually the travel lens that I have on my camera. And while this means that I'm not gonna be able to get the mountain way off in the distance, it's 600 millimeters away, it does mean that I'm going to get some really, really incredible images of the things that I actually am able to capture. If you guys wanna be kind of in the center here, I'm trying to frame out all the garbage cans. We'll see how good I can get. At least we get the foliage. And if you guys want to look at each other and get really close together. Right, there's the garbage can disappearing spot. Right, that's good. And if you guys want to look towards me for one or two here. Yeah, you can do hand in pocket. A little more casual then. Play the leg like a guitar. I get it. Awesome. That's good like that. And yeah, just kind of walk towards me here and just pretend you're going for a walk down tiny alleyway. So candid, so lovely. Now let's talk about the 35mm focal length for a minute. I love the 85, I love the 50, but I find with 35, you really feel like you're there and you're part of the scene. This is something that I really feel a separation from when I'm shooting with an 85. It starts to get that editorial feel and you don't really feel like you're in the scene. Whereas if you get really nice and close with the 35mm lens, especially on a wedding day, you feel like you're back in that moment. And if you are the couple and you're hiring a photographer to create those images to bring you back to that day, a 35mm lens is an incredible tool for that. Next up, the build quality and the weight of this. I'm pretty happy with it overall. If it was a little bit lighter, that would be great, but I have no problems with it whatsoever. I am not afraid to take this out in somewhat inclement weather conditions, like here in Iceland, taking a video of one of my best friend's proposals.
Want to have a real wedding?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Want to get married?
Yes.
And this lens has been pretty much in every weather condition, and it still looks completely brand new. For the physical, the buttons on it, you get one button. I never use this button. You can set it to focus lock or something if you want, but I don't really use the buttons. I do use this AF/MF slider. So autofocus, manual focus has a little toggle on the side here that I'll use pretty often. Specifically if I've set up a shot and I don't need to let my autofocus make any more decisions, or I know something's gonna be passing through that line of focus and I want that, I will switch to manual focus. I do this a lot in video. And on the other side, you have the click on or off. So if you want your aperture ring to make a click, you can set that to on. And if you do not want it to have a click and you want it to be smooth, you can set that to off. The reason that you'd want to do that is if you want to have seamless aperture movements when recording video. For my purposes, I usually leave it on this A mode, which just basically allows you to control the aperture on the camera rather than doing it on the dial. And while there is no lock to keep it in A mode, I find that it's very, very rare, if ever, that I've actually bumped this into f/16 and I've been shooting at f/16 all of a sudden. It pretty much stays on A aperture if you've set it to aperture A. So there it is, the 35mm f1.4 GM for Sony that you can get at Adorama. Any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. I really, really love this lens. And if you're interested in it, I suspect that you will love it just as much.